Welcome to Overcoming Physician Burnout as Health Architects, a series in which we talk about different ways that physicians can approach their clinical work to make it more rewarding and fulfilling. This is Venkatesh Ramnath. Today is episode 17, Myths, Part 2. Burnout is not moral injury. If you prefer reading, I invite you to look at the written post, which also includes embedded links for references. Previously, we talked about the importance of myths in the societies and cultures in which we live, and how they are important in medicine, from concepts of do no harm to people like William Osler. We also talked about how the health architect embodies a new myth, incorporating knowledge and skills to aspire to a state of health and wellness and conquer the demon of burnout that lives within and around us. Let's continue our discussion here by talking about an erroneous myth when it comes to burnout. That myth is the following. Burnout is better described as moral injury. Fact? False. Moral injury has become a defining term in recent years, thanks in large part to the work of psychiatrist Wendy Dean and surgeon Simon Talbot. The term moral injury resonates because it names something many clinicians feel deeply but can't quite articulate: the emotional and psychological pain that arises when we're asked to act in ways that conflict with our core values. When the needs of our patients clash with the demands of a system built on profits, metrics, and speed, something inside us begins to fracture. And when those fractures pile up, our entire world of right and wrong can collapse. In a nutshell, that's moral injury. However, moral injury and burnout are not the same, and that matters. Let's explain how they differ and see how the health architect navigates the difference. Let's start by talking about when they first appeared, since the first distinction is historical. Burnout has been around for centuries and is often associated with the situational stresses of the times. Shakespeare's characters, like Hamlet or Lady Macbeth, undergo physical and mental strain that harkens to today's burnout. By the late 1800s, on the other hand, neurologists actually coined the term neurasthenia to describe patients who experienced a physical and emotional toll in the aftermath of the U.S. Civil War, when the stresses of modern society, such as industrialization, neurologically affected patients' physical and mental state. It was Herbert Freudenberger and Christina Maslach who first used the term burnout in the 1970s when examining self-described behaviors of heroin addicts in New York City and human service workers in California, respectively. The subject they studied described a state marked by emotional and physical exhaustion, lack of accomplishment, depersonalization, and low self-worth. In short, they described burnout as a multi-dimensional distress. On the other hand, the term moral injury comes from the examination of the psychological effects of war, primarily those of the 20th and 21st centuries. The violation of basic moral codes, like killing other human beings rather than treating them with dignity, led to a specific type of distress that has been called shell shock, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, and now moral injury. One striking example comes from the book All Quiet on the Western Front, when Paul kills a French soldier in close combat during World War I and then finds a photograph of the man's family in his coat. The moment shatters him. What began as a mission to fight the enemy in glory becomes a painful reckoning with the senselessness of war and a betrayal of his own moral convictions. Physicians felt something similar during the COVID pandemic. We were forced to deliver care under conditions that were unthinkable just months earlier. Personal protective equipment, normally plentiful, was rationed. Hospital gift shops were converted into makeshift medical wards. Surgeries were delayed indefinitely while operating rooms lay empty. Patients suffered on life support when recovery was impossible. It didn't just feel bad, it felt immoral. Today, moral injury shows up in different pressures: being told to see more patients in less time to reach budget targets, to hit satisfaction scores and predetermined RVU goals, to answer patients' messages at night, or to write notes long after our shifts end. Meanwhile, healthcare systems seem to be less interested in hiding their insatiable appetite for financial gain, and the book If I Betray These Words by Dean and Talbot paints this picture vividly, how corporate priorities can distort and even poison the practice of medicine. Moral injury captures the cognitive dissonance of all of this. It all just feels unfair and wrong. Moral injury and burnout describe differing types of distress, which points to a second distinction between the two terms: how they actually hurt us. Moral injury damages our psyche directly, in the form of psychological angst. This may lead to depression or anxiety, or PTSD, but the main consequences are mental. Burnout, on the other hand, causes broader damage. First, it causes mental pain deriving from all kinds of psychological distress, not just moral. We can be mentally burned out from struggling to pay the mortgage, arguing with our spouse, scurrying through the back roads to get to work on time, pleading with our children to do their homework, scrambling to respond to emails, calling to get the dishwasher fixed for the second time in a month, or dealing with other realities of modern life. Just trying to get through the day can be an emotional grind. None of this is necessarily moral. But burnout is also physical. Long shifts at work, missed sleep, skipped meals, and just plain old muscle fatigue from running around. It all adds up. And the result is exhaustion on both physical and mental levels. Burnout, in essence, is a total system meltdown. But moral injury and burnout don't just feel different, they evolve differently too. This is a third distinction between the terms. Understanding moral injury can be tricky in part because not every moral conflict leads to injury. Medicine is full of moral dilemmas. Some are simply part of the job. Take, for example, a baby born with a terminal condition, or a trauma patient critically injured by a drunk driver. These moments are tragic and uncomfortable, but they don't necessarily constitute moral injury because they aren't pathological per se. They're just the kind of moral weight we expect to carry as physicians. Yet in many recent frameworks, especially the one put forward by Wendy Dean, this nuance is lost. Dean draws a hard line, suggesting that moral injury only arises when systemic pressures force clinicians to act against their values. While that definition resonates with many, it also narrows our view. It selectively elevates certain types of moral conflict while dismissing others as irrelevant. But who decides which dilemmas count as real injury and which don't? And what about all the early career warning signs that get overlooked? In addition, by fixating solely on systemic betrayal, Dean's framing speaks primarily to physicians deep into their careers, when the damage has already been often done. It misses the opportunity to understand how smaller moments of moral residue and distress can accumulate over time, gradually hardening into full-blown moral injury later. Burnout, on the other hand, is easier to trace. Its evolution is progressive and predictable. It doesn't hinge on one moral rupture alone, but on a slow erosion of meaning and motivation, often starting much earlier than we think. These issues often stem from the difficulty of reconciling our inner world of expectations with an outer world of real constraints. In fact, Edelwich and Brodsky outlined this clearly with their 4-stage model of burnout. Stage number 1, idealistic enthusiasm. This is where many of us begin: college, pre-med, or the first days of medical school. We're driven by a passion to heal, inspired by the science of the body, and filled with the belief that anything is possible. Stage number 2, stagnation. This is when reality starts to set in. Usually during early residency, we begin to sense that the system isn't what we imagined. The work is harder, the reward's less clear, and our idealism starts to dim. Stage number 3, frustration. Here, we recognize that something is deeply wrong. The gap between what we hope for and what we actually experience grows wider. For many, this stage hits during fellowship or early attending years. Finally, there's stage number 4, apathy. This is the final stage: depersonalization, detachment, a loss of meaning. This is what most people recognize as true burnout, the point where emotional and physical exhaustion turn into withdrawal. With the stepwise model of Edelwich and Brodsky, burnout becomes easier to detect and easier to intervene upon. It often starts quietly, but progresses steadily, gaining momentum over time. From the inside, it may feel sudden, but from a broader view, it's a predictable unfolding, shaped by our psychological makeup, professional environment, and personal expectations. This brings us to the heart of why it's so essential to distinguish between burnout and moral injury, because doing so unlocks the power and possibility of healing. Moral injury, at its core, is a static and rigid construct. It frames conflict in binary terms: my morals versus yours, right versus wrong. Each side becomes locked in a winner-take-all confrontation. But the truth is, our work and our humanity is far more complex than that. The world isn't divided into black and white. It's made of shades of gray. Even our most sacred moral commandments, like thou shalt not kill, aren't absolute. If they were, how could any war ever be justified? Myths have long understood this truth. Every spring, I revisit the operas of Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle, a sort of personal ritual. It's a masterwork built on moral complexity. Wotan, the king of the gods, Siegfried, the archetypal hero, and Alberich, the scheming antagonist, all of them are morally mixed. They strive for greatness, but also betray, manipulate, and fall. They're not purely good or evil, they're human. The enduring power of Wagner's myth, and so many others like it, is that it reflects a truth we often resist: that morality is situational, evolving, and shaped by context. It's not a fixed purity we either possess or lose. Furthermore, when we cling too tightly to the rigid framework of moral injury, we risk falling into a trap. By forcing all change to happen outside of us, we surrender our own power. We place ourselves in a passive role, waiting, sometimes endlessly, for someone else to make it right. And when that help doesn't come, the pain deepens. Our frustration leads to resentment, resentment to cynicism, and cynicism to victimhood. Seeing ourselves as helpless victims of a broken system, we eventually lose our sense of agency altogether. We're left wallowing in despair, disempowerment, and a feeling of being irreparably stuck. While moral injury gives us language to describe the wounds of the past, it offers no clear way to build to a better future. That's where burnout differs. Burnout is dynamic. Burnout acknowledges that we are human, flawed, complex, and shaped not only by our jobs, but also by our upbringing, personalities, and expectations. It recognizes that perfection is impossible, and that what we imagine to be perfect actually changes over time. It sees that the emotional toll of medicine isn't just about morals. It's about fatigue, disillusionment, and unmet hopes. The mythical demon of burnout is thus multidimensional, contextual, nuanced, and innately human. Facing burnout invites reflection into all parts of ourselves, even the darker ones. It allows us to examine our internal wiring, our expectations, value systems, and psychological patterns. Are we workaholic, perfectionistic, or people-pleasing? How much do we value integrity, prestige, wealth, and creativity? Who are we, and who do we want to be? We enter this world with certain beliefs and coping styles which don't always fit the realities of modern medicine, but that mismatch can be overcome. It's an opportunity for growth. Burnout reminds us that even when we're confused about what to do, we have choices. Some choices are small, whether to go to the gym or binge another Netflix show. Others are bigger, choosing where we work, how we set boundaries, and what kind of physician or person we want to be. These aren't moral dilemmas. They're decisions that shape how we live and how we heal. Where moral injury keeps us tethered to wounds of the past, burnout ushers in a path forward to explore the possibilities of the future, through agency, through connection, through purpose and meaning. That's where the myth of the health architect comes in. It's a vision of what's possible when we reclaim our agency with clarity and intention and build connections with others. It's a dynamic ideal, not something fixed or perfect, but something aspirational. A reminder that we don't have to hand over our humanity to broken systems or wait passively for top-down reform. The myth of the health architect, like other hero-based myths, is action-oriented. When Odysseus approached the sirens, he didn't foolishly expect that they would stop singing. He tied himself to the mast. When Arjuna stood on the battlefield, he didn't fecklessly hope that the Kauravas would retreat. He listened to Krishna, took up his bow, and stepped forward. These heroes didn't descend into a fatalistic pity party. They stood up and acted. The health architect is no different. We don't wait, we act. We engage the system on our terms. We seek out knowledge. We redesign workflows. We reaffirm old skills and hone new ones. We speak with empathy and precision. We make conscious decisions about where and how to practice. And we care for ourselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, so that we can take care of others with clarity and compassion. The myth of the health architect isn't some escapist fantasy. It's the only credible way to defeat the mythical demon of burnout that lives within us. Take-home point. Moral injury and burnout are distinct yet often conflated experiences, one rooted in violations of core morals, the other in a multidimensional erosion of physical, emotional, and existential energy. While moral injury pulls us to decry what is behind us, casting clinicians as powerless victims of systemic betrayal, burnout impels us on a path forward, one grounded in agency, self-awareness, and transformation into the future. The myth of the health architect provides a dynamic, actionable ideal, not to wait for reform, but to build with purpose, reconnect with meaning, and reclaim our humanity on our terms. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this post. In the next one, we'll continue our discussion about erroneous myths as regards burnout. Talk to you soon.